Right, science study looks the same kind of thing. We ran independent studies for the three subjects. We didn't want our judges in this instance to try and compare biology and physics items, so we got basically biology teachers to look at biology items all for the three subjects. Each one was about the same size as the previous maths study, and in this instance we were just comparing the 2014 summer items to the sample assessments for the reformed GCSEs. We had about the same number of judges for each study, and they were science teachers in this instance. And this question, we were trying to adapt our questioning as we went along to try and get a more sort of valid measure. So we were asking them to think a bit more about what students would experience. So we asked them what question is more difficult to achieve full marks on. There were reasons why we took that approach. So we're asking how hard is it to get 6 out of 6, or 1 out of 1, or 3 out of 3. Partly this was we wanted to model the data, and asking how difficult full marks is allowed us to do certain things with the data. Also, it's a very clear benchmark against which to judge. So
we did do some piloting on that question, didn't we? And all of these questions we tried out different ways of asking things, and it's really important how you construct the question, and I think we need more research on what is the best question.
If you ask a vague question, you end up with inconsistency in the judging, and then we find it very hard to get consistent estimates of difficulty. Okay, that has some consequences later that I'll come on to. Right, looks a bit different. The figure on the left is the same figure as before, except for the 2014 items, we actually had a measure of how the students performed on the items called facility, which I think probably some of you are familiar with. This just tells us what proportion of the maximum marks available students achieved on average. So, if every student got every single mark for that item in real life, the facility's 1. But that's a low difficulty question. If on average students got half marks, facility will be 0.5. So the relationship goes downwards, regression line drawn on again, showing the average relationship. And that's because high difficulty, low facility. Okay. What we're interested in here again is how do the items differ from that overall pattern? So the right-hand figure is just taking, for each point, it's taking the distance between the line and the point, the vertical separation. Again, we were interested in looking at the individual boards and seeing whether there was fair judging for each board. They're colour-coded. I don't know how clear it is on screen. The 0 line is just here, just below the R of residual. There were actually offsets here. I'll show you on the next slide the magnitude of these offsets. I think you might be able to see that the greeny bluey ones are slightly offset upwards from 0. The brick red, if that's the right description of the colour, are somewhat set down from the line. And these numbers indicate that some boards were over-judged in difficulty, the items from some boards, whereas the items from other boards were under-judged in difficulty. Okay, so look at the left-hand figure and try to remember that the range of items on the expected difficulty scale goes from about +5 to -5. Okay? When you sum up all of the item values for a particular exam board and compare it to the sum of all the items for another exam board, they only differ by tenths. If we were to see a difference between board A and board B that was around half, that would be quite a substantial difference. Okay? When we look at averaging the bias, the residuals on the right-hand side, okay, bit of a leap here. So we average these and get what we call a bias. These are of the order of 0.3, 0.4 above or below the 0 line. So board A, those items are on average being judged by our teachers to be easier than the students found them. Board B's items were on average judged to be about 0.2, 0.3 harder than the students found them. And so if we were to compare board A and board B, we've got a difference potentially that we think is being caused by a bias in the judging of 0.6, 0.7. So we felt we needed to do something about this, and this also gave us some really useful information about how items are perceived, which is what we want to focus on here. Yes, so I made that point already. The second point is very important. In no way are we saying that our judges did anything wrong. This was all sort of good judging, and they were judging them fairly and equally, but we think that there were features of the questions that would lead them to make particular kinds of judgments. Just sort of surface features of the questions, maybe the type of question it is. And when you sum up all of the items for each exam board, you might get this bias because one exam board's items are more multiple choice, less extended response, or vice versa. So don't walk away from this thinking that we're accusing our science teachers of doing something wrong. They weren't. Hopefully you'll follow me here. We used a multiple linear regression model to explain the contribution of different question features. What this does is it says, on average, if a question has this feature, we would see this amount of bias in the judging. Okay? So if it's a multiple choice question, on average, this will be either under or over judged in difficulty. And the model plows through all of the data, all of those residuals, all the mismatches between the line and the points, and tries to guess or fit a model to explain how much effect each factor has. I'll show you the factors on the next slide. We put them all into the model, and some come out as significant predictors of bias, and some come out as non-significant. So that tells us which features are actually influencing our judges. Okay? I know it's sort of a bit dense. Hopefully you'll sort of follow this. This is how we coded the questions. We categorised them into 5 types of question. Constrained response is a non-written answer that's not multiple choice. Usually it's drawing lines on figures, this kind of thing. We also split short answer questions into 1-liners and 2 or 3-liners, and anything longer than that we called extended response. So each question could only be one of those 5 types. Then we coded a variety of other features. We counted the number of words. That includes the question stem for all of the subparts. So even if a part C is only a 10-word question, if there's a whole load of text at the start, we included that. And does it include a calculation? And which additional visual aids are included in the question? We coded drawings and photographs as relevant or irrelevant, which sounds rather harsh. What we mean by irrelevant is that you can remove the drawing or the photograph and no essential information is lost. Okay, so it's not absolutely necessary to answer the question. It may help in some small way, but you don't need it. Right, dense slide. Okay, ignore the text on the left. I'll try and explain what the table is representing. We fitted one of these models to each of the subject data, so we can see how consistent they are between biology, physics, chemistry. The numbers represent how much each feature adds to the bias. So we start off at 0. We say, I should explain, constant means extended response. Okay? So 0 for a question. If it's an extended response, we add 0.5 to 1 bias, so that is being judged harder than it was actually found by students. Then word count adds about 0.01 per word. So for a fixed difficulty question, if it has 50 more words than a similarly difficult question, it will be judged to be 0.5 harder on this scale that goes from 5 to -5. Likewise, yes. So what we should do is probably go down the factors on the left. Question type's always a significant predictor of this bias. Now this is partly because of what we asked our judges to think about. So we said, how hard is it to get full marks? The type of question is related to the number of marks. Extended response are obviously the high tariff questions. But I want you to look at the MCQ constrained and short 1 values. These were all almost entirely 1-mark questions. Consistently, the multiple choice questions were judged to be easier than an equivalent difficulty short one or constrained question. Okay? So our judges thought multiple choice was easy or easier than the students found them. If you've got a question of equal difficulty, if it includes a calculation, it's judged to be 0.7 harder, which is quite a substantial leap in difficulty. So these are questions that students did equally well on. It appears as though we're actually misconstruing the difficulty, that these calculation questions aren't actually as hard for the students as we think they are. Right, other factors were a bit inconsistent. Where the row is blank, where a cell is blank, that indicates that there was no significant prediction. There's this effect of diagrams. It appears as though our judges felt that diagrams, whether irrelevant or relevant, might help the student a little bit when in fact they're not. So the diagram led to underjudging of difficulty. And the other factors are sort of interactions generally. They're based on a relatively small number of items, so I won't go over those particularly. What's interesting is that this is trying to explain the residual, the mismatch between the two types of difficulty predictions. Just question features alone explained about 40% of that scatter. So that's ignoring all of the cognitive factors, the domain, all of those kind of things. Just surface features seem to have quite a strong driver of these judgments. Okay, I'll show some pictures. Right, these are typical multiple choice type questions that were judged to be really easy, but students found them a little bit harder. They combine multiple choice and very few words. It could be that because the judgments were being made quite rapidly, our teacher judges were relying on heuristics, kind of basically going, it's a multiple choice, it must be easy, in order to make a quick judgment, and missing out on the subtleties of where the difficulty lies. Don't know. We're getting to the point of sort of slight speculation here. All I can show you is items which had a mismatch between actual difficulty and expected difficulty, and you can think about why that might be. This is an item that was judged to be very, very difficult, but students actually got over half marks on it. It's an extended response item, so that's always going to lead to slight overjudging because it's hard to get 6 out of 6. Very quickly, typical kind of calculation question that was judged to be extremely difficult, but it actually came out right in the centre of the range of difficulty. It's quite a lot of words for the students to get their heads around, and it requires a calculation. The one below is just a typical kind of extended response question with a lot of wordage, and naturally judged quite difficult, but students did okay on it. Not terribly interesting, it's almost just in there for a sort of, this is typical. Okay, so summary, we're almost getting there. To reiterate that this mismatch between the predicted difficulty, the expected difficulty, and actual difficulty is partly due to what we asked our judges to do. But there are real biases in the perception of the judges underlying that. So this issue of multiple choice questions being judged, an equivalent difficulty multiple choice and short answer question, the multiple choice will be judged to be easier. And calculation questions appear to be overjudged in difficulty. Students actually, maybe they're all taking GCSE maths and they can actually do all of these calculation questions. I don't know. They're also better, we think, at extracting the information they need from large blocks of text. So the large blocks of text are not necessarily adding difficulty, even though they are perceived to do so. Right, so when you're looking at exam papers with your students doing exam prep, just kind of bear these kind of things in mind. This was a very sort of specific type of approach to judging. However, our judges were doing what any expert would do when looking at a question and thinking how difficult it was. Just because it was done online and comparing to, they're still thinking, what's the difficulty of that question? So you might find that we all fall into patterns and biases in our judgments. So all judgments are fallible, whether we're laymen or experts.